Hi everybody, nearly time for another Pure Floyd gig, and I thought I'd just show you the normal routine I have to go through, well, once every so often anyway, but usually before a gig, especially if we've had a little bit of time off. This thing is in desperate need of a bit of a service and a trim up. I can just start to feel the frets again a little bit as the weather's got drier. This guitar was only put together about 6 months ago, so it's put together in the middle of winter, and it's drying out a little bit. I can just start to feel the frets. That's going to be real uncomfortable. So just give you a bit of a rundown what's going on with this guitar to start with. It's not a Fender. This is a thing that I built from parts myself. That's my name on the headstock. It's got an alder body with this candy apple red finish. It's a polyurethane finish, not a beautiful nitro finish, and it really doesn't matter. This is not exactly the same spec as David Gilmour used in the 80s and 90s, and that's deliberately so. So for example, this one has a much bigger neck. This is the D neck. It's a big chunk of wood. I haven't got very big hands, but because of a slight lack of strength in my own hand, I like to get hold of something to get hold, something big. And what that will do is it will give me a lot of wood to bend the string against. Also, it's got jumbo frets in it. It hasn't got vintage frets. I can't play vintage frets, unfortunately. I just don't have the hand strength for the vibrato against it. Tremolo isn't a Fender tremolo. It's actually a Wilkinson tremolo because I like the nylon bushing rather than the spring at the bottom. It gives me the tension I want to make sure that this arm doesn't float away in places I don't want it. A bit like David Gilmour's, I've shortened the arm, and that's because there's certain things he does, especially on those 80s, 90s tours, where he's holding the tremolo arm there and he's depressing the arm while he's picking. And if the tremolo arm is this long, it's actually quite difficult to do. So to actually get some of those things to work, that's the best way of doing it. Now the other thing is we have got the EMGs in here, and they are set up exactly the same way as the original Gilmour set. This is one of those DG sets, and that's really it. You know, it's in reality it's basically a pretty standard Strat of one nature or another. Well, first thing we're going to do is get all these strings off of here, and then we'll have a look at what needs to be done to get it gig ready. The first thing I'm going to deal with today is the edges of these frets. They're not overhanging as such, but I can feel them. So I'm just going to make sure with my fret file that there's nothing coming over the edge. I'm just going to lift that off of there so I can get my hand to it. This is a 2000 paper. Okay, there's just a little bit of wear to the top of the frets. It's not unrounding it, but it's just where it just feels not perfectly smooth again. So to make it really good for bending strings, I'm just going to get a fret guard. Okay, so that's done. The next thing we're going to do with this guitar is change the battery. Now, with these ones, unfortunately, the battery is actually inside the guitar. Actually, I'm just going to take the neck rest out. which is a pain. One thing you'll never see me do with a guitar, almost never see me do with a guitar, I'd have to be in a real hurry, is use an electric screwdriver. I have a real aversion to those things because it's so easy to slip. You know, you can make a real mess of a guitar. Not that, you know, it matters too much if this thing gets a chip in it. I mean, it's my gigging guitar. At the end of this year, it won't so much be retired, but it'll be put to the back of the rack, and the black and white, you know, the black Strat will come to the front, I hope. I get back to using my own pickups, which is nice because I've wound that bridge pickup to exactly where I want it. But the most important thing with this is that you never let the batteries get old. These ones have been here, or this battery, it's a 9-volt battery that runs this system. It's been in here since Christmas. 7 months with one battery. Okay, it's not a lot of gigs. It's not even a huge amount of rehearsals. But, you know, with big shows like this, you never wait for the battery to run out, do you? You just, you know, for the sake of a few quid for a battery, you just take the one out that you've got in there once every so often and throw it away. Okay, so now you get to see the inside. There's a little bit of wire there. Okay, so you can see this is the EMG circuit board. I don't know whether I can actually zoom that in for you a little bit. There you go, can't see it. All the pickups are on solderless connections, which is fantastic. So if you do have a fault, it's a very, very quick swap over. And they're all totally encased in epoxy resin. They're totally shielded. And don't ask me exactly how EMGs work. I'm not an expert on them, but they are pretty much noiseless. And you've got 2 tone controls. Now, these 2 tone controls aren't tone controls like you find on a Strat. This one here is a mid-range boost, and that one there is a mid-range scoop, so it's a top and bottom boost. Right, let's have that battery out of there. Yeah, it's not bad. It's still got some charge left in it, but not enough. If you're ever doing this for testing batteries, if you've got a battery test tab on your multimeter, I think all guitar players should have a multimeter, even if it's just for checking cables. Okay. That's showing 9.58. That's a good battery, okay? Your battery should always be well above 9 volts. As soon as it dips down to about 9 volts, get rid of it, it's going to die. So, that can go back in there. It sits underneath here. You don't need anything on there. It will stay nice and solid because the space is just right. Okay. Everything else is working okay. There's no noise and there's no problems with the pots, so I'm not going to go through all the hassle of cleaning them out. They're absolutely fine anyway. Okay, the next thing, it's the obvious one, just give it a bit of a clean. Now, a lot of guitarists will tell you never to use this stuff anywhere near your guitar. It's okay on these polyurethane finishes. I wouldn't use it on cellulose. But, you know, basically this stuff is coated in plastic. I didn't finish this, you know, it's not one of those beautiful nitrocellulose finishes. It's just, you know, get the surface clean. Remove some sweat marks and all the horrible stuff that happens during gigs, because it does get under all the lights, even though they're all LED, eventually it does get pretty warm on stage. Okay. The other thing you can do, if I've got one to hand, I usually do have, but I probably put it in the wrong drawer. Oh, there it is. Yeah. A nice stiff paintbrush, very handy for just getting any dust out of the tremolo unit, so that you're not constantly taking the tremolo unit apart to clean dust out of it, because once it gets really ingrained in there, you'll have a heck of a time getting it out without taking the tremolo to pieces, and I don't really want to do that more than once a year if I can help it, because it's time consuming and annoying. Okay. Right, good. So we get on to the business end. Okay, and the business end of this is always the same. People always ask me the same question about playing David Gilmour's songs on stage with a real Strat. And that's, how do you keep this guitar in tune when you're giving it so much tremolo abuse? Well, the key to it's actually very, very simple. You've got a couple of points of contact, your bridge saddles and your nut. You have to make sure that they're in very good shape. So that means that there's no rubbish in your slots, and I'll show you how to deal with the slots in a moment. The second thing is you have to make sure that your strings are wound on properly on your tuning heads. Now with these, that's actually pretty simple to do because there's only one right way of doing it, and it becomes quite obvious as you do it. But the other thing is about high spring and string tension. I use 10s. I don't know whether this technique will work as well with 9s, but I like a strong tension. And my technique is to put 4 springs in the back of the guitar and to have the tremolo always floating. Now, it's true that at some stages during his career, David Gilmour did deck the tremolo, and that's absolutely fine thing to do, but I find that you're going to have more problems with tuning if the tremolo isn't constantly holding the strings under equal pressure, because if you were to get one to stick, you can just give it a quick pull on the tremolo arm and suddenly you've got it's trying to equalize itself again, and if you've got a little bit of stickiness in the nut, you can probably overcome it that way. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean that nut, and for this at the moment I'm just going to use the back of a scalpel blade to make sure there's nothing in there that shouldn't be. Yep, that's fine. Now I'm going to use the same blade and a little bit of cloth. We'll grab that. Give me a sec, let me just grab the lubricant we're going to use today. Now, this is lithium grease. This is not the best one to use, strange enough. They do one that comes as like a harder grease, which is white, like a white lithium, and it comes in a pot. And with this stuff, I just tend to stick some on a piece of card. I always keep these cards here. So you can see it's quite dark and a little bit oily. And it works perfectly well, but you probably need to renew it every couple of gigs. And all I do, just move this way a little bit so you can maybe see what's going on, is to take a little bit of it on the card like that and push it into the slot. You don't need a huge great amount, because as you put the string on, believe it or not, it's going to take some of that out anyway, but I find that it just leaves a thin film of it on the bottom and sides of the slot. Okay, which, I mean, it will probably work without the lubricant, don't get me wrong. I mean, if the nut's nice and smooth and it's been cut well, you know, the guitar will stay in tune without it. This is my version of belt and braces, basically. And all I'm going to do is just wipe across the top of there. You won't get into the slots to get it out. Okay, so now comes the interesting bit. Let's put some strings on it. Now, the other thing about these tuners here, these old-fashioned tuners, you've got to have your cutters at the ready. Got to be the right length. Don't try and wind too much on. So, string through the back. What we're going to do is put all 6 strings through. And I'm pulling these out of a big box of strings because I keep a luthier pack on the bench of 10s all the time. So I've always got 25 or 30 sets in stock. Okay, first one first. Let's get that out of my way a little bit. It's all the way up in the hole in the back of the guitar. And you note, by the way, that I don't put the back plate on the guitar because, let's face it, I don't need it in my way. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself about, I don't know, a couple of tuners length over the top of the one that I need. Goes into the hole, I press it down, and I'm just going to take, as you can see, I'm just keeping some tension on it with my finger so it winds down the peg, and I want to get about 2 to 2.5 turns on this one minimum. And I'm holding it out of the slot, by the way. It's not in the slot. I'm not winding all that grease out of the slot. Now I'm just about to tune. That's a little bit high actually, but that's fine. And now it drops in the slot, and I've got 2.5 wraps on there on that bass string. And what that's done is it's given me a reasonably good angle over the top of the nut. It's got great contact, but it's not right down the bottom, so that I've got so much that it's creating too much friction for the tremolo to stay in tune. So I'm putting the B in, and this time I'm just going to leave myself a little bit more to wind on. And the reason being is I want to wind it further down the peg so that it's not going down and then back up to the peg. So we've got less friction. I only want it to be just using that peg as a guide. So I want this to wind down the peg quite a bit further. Now, if I've done this right, okay, and you can see how this is working, I hope. It'd have to be that way round, wouldn't it? So, what I hope you can see here is that where the string is going down towards the peg, it's going down at what is almost like, what you would say, a direct angle from the nut. Yes, it's touching the string tree, but it's not touching the back of the string tree, just the front. It's going down at a pretty consistent angle. And that's what I'm trying to achieve there, because yes, this guide is helping to keep a little bit of pressure on here, but I could almost do away with that and it would stay in the nut slot and still give you enough. Now, okay, the next thing we've got to do to this, we've got to make sure that these strings are really, really well stretched out, okay? Because if they're not, then when we start bending and working these strings really hard, there's going to be a major problem. They're going to be all over the place. So what I tend to do is I'll work my way along the string, and you can feel I'm actually stretching it from one side of my hand to the other all the way along. And I make sure that I lift it out of the nut and that this section at the end is getting stretched as much as everything else. Okay, now that's going to have dropped about a tone. And I'm going to do that with all the strings because it's the core of the string that you're stretching. So you've really got to make sure that these strings are properly stretched out. Now, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's going to stay in tune throughout the show. So, all we have to do now, plug it in, test the intonation, see what it sounds like. Okay, so this is the moment of truth. I've got a clean sound switched on here. This is the sound that I use for the beginning of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and it's from my Helix unit, which I use mainly for rehearsing and as a backup just in case something goes wrong with the analog system. Okay, so what we need to do is just give it some abuse and see what happens. Now, I'm fairly happy with that because I'm not going to dive the tremolo quite that hard at any stage during the gig. Maybe at the end of Sorrow, if I get carried away, I might hit it that hard. But these tremolo arms, because it's a short arm, and of course with the 4 springs, it's pretty stiff, okay? And, you know, it doesn't want to go and move around on its own. So that's the key to keeping these in tune. Really stretch your strings out. Make sure that your nut is well lubricated. Make sure that your winds are clean and that your string angles are good going over the nut, that you haven't wound too many on the bass strings or haven't wound on not enough at the other end to keep that angle consistent. The 4 springs is important. And for me, another thing that I probably didn't mention earlier is not to over tighten the screws on the bridge that hold the bridge to the guitar. In fact, the 4 in the middle are slightly looser than the ones on the outside, which are keeping it towards the plate. And as long as you've kept everything clean and lubricated and your strings are properly stretched out, the guitar should get through the entire gig in tune. Well, see you at the next gig, I hope. Thanks for watching.